Hello, today's video is called Lots of Ideas, No Plans and Betrayals. This is part 6 of Public Inquiry to Federal Government Invoking the Emergency Act on February 2022. Today is October 20th, 2022, and as shared, this was day 6 of the inquiry. The agenda for today is background witnesses and my point of view. Everybody knows that we are reviewing very briefly the outline of the daily inquiry that is taking place in the city of Ottawa to understand the reasons why Justin Castro, the Crime Minister of Canada, invoked the Emergency Act on February 14, 2022 against the protesters who were in the city in February of this year, and if the powers that he used were misused or were overreaching the authority granted by the act. Please note that due to the memory capacity that I have on my Vimeo account, I deleted the videos from days 1 to 3, and now I am noticing that I'm not being banned from YouTube, so I will load them again during the weekend. And also on my website, you're going to have again the access of every single day, and the live feed is in the link below. Today we had two witnesses between 9:30 to 5:50 p.m. The first witness was Patricia Ferguson, active deputy chief. I love that when the commission councillor called her, she said, "I'm not the deputy chief, I am the active deputy chief." So I found that fascinating because she was very keen, but she was lovely throughout the whole testimony. And she was talking about her role, supervise the police, planning before the arrival of the convoy, and work directly with Slowly, and we're going to see that they didn't have a good positive interaction. She had planning over intelligence, and then prior to the convoy, the protests were based not in intelligence, but they were all peaceful. There's an L missing here. And the approach was more in terms of negotiations. You're going to see through the presentation that her approach is very conciliatory, not confrontational at all. And she was aware of the potential of the convoy to stay longer, particularly because of the GoFundMe and obviously because of the growth in numbers. But she states that when the Hendon report was saying that potentially it was only short stay, I actually don't agree with that, because yesterday we saw that that report was clearly stating that it was indication that they were going to stay longer. I have the sense that she was not reading all her emails. It also overlapped with a couple of days that she took off. I don't think that she did say that in terms to try to deceive, but maybe she was missing some communication. And she was talking about some dates. January 13, the intelligence about the convoy was shared with OPS, so you can see a timeline. Before the arrival, they already knew, they had some intelligence. January 17, the convoy was traveling to Ottawa. January 27 to 28 is the first official report she saw of Hendon. And then on January 31st, there was a brief at 8 a.m., and it was taking place twice per day about now it became an occupation. I noticed that when she was talking about that, she got interrupted to ask the commission councillor, and he was asked not to ask questions without providing the document, so not use her recollection. So that was just a minor, perhaps technical issue between them. And she was asked what could have been done differently. And then she said, well, give more credibility to the intelligence that we had gathered. I found that interesting because to me that's obvious, but maybe because of either animosities or because of the amount of intelligence, maybe she didn't give it enough credibility. I didn't understand why she would say that. She specified her role as very strategic, and her objective and her role is to inform all the different parties about the goals that you're trying to achieve. Then the second layer, so to speak, going down, is called event or operational commander. And these are the responsible of creating a plan to reach the objectives, and then you have a tactical and executional team that are the ones that are going to actually deploy the plan per se. You also have something called PLTs that is communicating with businesses and also with the convoy organizers. And this PLT team, we're going to see it through the presentation of today, that is very important because typically are very well trained in de-escalating very challenging situations, and they have done it successfully multiple times. And both her and the next witness strongly believe in that type of approach. Here we see that January 31st is now an occupation, so there is a communication internally between all parties saying, okay, now we need a plan. But by February 4th, and you can see it here in the calendar, a whole week has gone by. This is day one of the convoy. And then you have a whole week and not a plan yet. So her explanation for that was everybody was involved in the tactical in the streets, trying to control the situation, traffic, and trying to understand what was the risk and controlling the crowds, but not enough people for planning. So obviously this is going to lead to slowly asking for more resources, but that was her explanation as to why so many days passed by without any plan in place when it was clearly the need to do that. Now, on February 5th, the plan that came out of Slowly was interesting, to say the least. His plan included shutting down the funds, the fuel, and the fun, 3 Fs. I just don't even understand how can anyone seriously say that we're going to get rid of the castles and we're going to get rid of the dancing, when in reality, I understand why you could want to either regulate or diminish the possibility of a fire, particularly in downtown. I understand, okay, don't do this, don't do that. I understand giving direction, but this part is, I don't know. I just find it incredible. So she's talking about here about a success in terms of negotiation that took place with the PLT teams, and she was saying that she was ratifying their ability to de-escalate situations and make them coming to a successful resolution. The chief of police said, why would I be negotiating with unlawful protesters? So it's just a lot of comments from Slowly, and you're going to see it in a minute, that they were very confrontational, both while talking in the overall sense of how he was going to manage the convoy. You're going to hear words such as, I will crush them, don't bother arguing. It's just very aggressive internally, because anyone who challenges the operation plan, I will crush them, don't bother arguing. So you can see how he didn't even allow any input, which clearly was necessary, as we know now. I don't expect you to understand. This is our house and we will do it our way. That's pretty brutal to say that. And last night was amateur hour, and it was because the computers were not properly set up or something like that. And he was just very aggressive in his wording and his manner. I don't expect softness from the chief of police of a city, but I think that he was extremely aggressive with his own people, which obviously did not help the situation. Now, one thing that she was very clear about is that when this mission statement from the whole plan was written down and distributed between all the people, she was very clear about, I want you to write down to safely negotiate, because that is her style. Every single document she says she has ever created always start with that approach, but then Slowly said to end the unlawful elements of the Ottawa truck demonstration, etc. So you can clearly see that the approach was very confrontational, even in writing and both in person. Now here we talk about the February 9 situation on the Rideau success intersection. Remember that we talked about this, saying that there was very contentious, very volatile, and they are saying again that there were mostly people from Quebec. Sadly, when I visited Ottawa here, I never went to that area. I would have loved to go there and see what was happening, but again, I don't know if I can trust their version, but everybody's consistently saying that. And this is pretty interesting. They were saying to anyone who wanted to leave, you're not going anywhere, you have to hold the line. So even very intimidating to their own protesters, which I think it's a little bit tough to understand, but again, that's what they're saying. And they wanted to make arrests to just recover the area, but obviously it was very risky for the officers to go in very few numbers, because apparently, and we're going to see it in a minute, 2 times they were swarmed by the crowd. So obviously they just retreat. They're not going to get into a confrontation. By February 10, she says, is the worst day of her professional career. She was discussing with Slowly, and eventually, because again, the approach is different. The approach is she wants to go and negotiate, and Slowly just wants to crush these people. So obviously, Everyone is concerned about the safety of the officers without enough numbers. That makes sense that they wouldn't want to support his plan. And she actually offered her resignation because she was not in agreement with the plan. The same day, apparently, she went to her office and then slowly came and she said, you know what, take a couple of days off. You're just emotional, you're tired. I don't know what to think about that. I don't think that it's appropriate to say that, but anyway, she took 2 days off. Here you can see them, 11 and 12, and then on Sunday 13 she returned. That was actually the day that I was in Ottawa. And then Patterson was removed, that it was the superintendent in charge, and then Bernier, a new superintendent, was appointed. So when she returned from vacation, this gentleman Bernier is reporting to her. So you can see how that's totally confusing for a person coming back from a couple of days off, finding that you have a new report, you were not part of the interview process. It's just very chaotic. So the way she described it is that many changes, no plan, not qualified people, and very low morale. And I'm sure that she was including herself in that group if she actually offered her resignation. One thing that I have heard more than once is that Slowly was focused on Ottawa and Ottawa itself and not understanding the repercussions of anything that could happen in Ottawa and then be reflected in other parts of Canada. What could you have done better was a question that the commission counselor asked. You always get that question at the end of the witnesses' statements. And then she said that she could have been more involved in the tactical and for others to be able to listen more to each other, because obviously, and she described it this way, this type of job attracts certain type of very strong personalities. So it's very hard for anyone to listen to each other, which I can totally see that. Now, Bernier, she describes as very intense. We're going to see him next week on the stand. And he was reporting to her, as I said, when she was returning on Sunday, the 13th. So when she returned, you can see the emails on Sunday, 10:46 p.m. These people were really working all the time. But what is interesting is that they were working really hard, but they were not really accomplishing much because there was not a plan even in that moment. There was, when she returned, and remember, the act was deployed here. So one night before, when it's literally less than 24 hours before you're going to deploy the emergency act, she's being asked by Slowly, send me the plan. And then she doesn't even know which is the plan because there are two plans. Bernier has been working in her absence in a different plan, and then 3.0, it was one of the plans. It was abandoned when she was away. So clearly she was not on the loop. Very confusing. Why would you give 2 days off to this lady? It feels to me like he got her out of the picture just to put Bernier in charge. And again, we haven't talked about Bernier. We don't know if he was good or bad. Clearly, he integrated the plan. It was the plan that was deployed, etc. But he was here shown in the org chart as being in the center of the whole situation. So you can understand how she's supposed to be the boss of Bernier, who's in the center of the whole operation, but she doesn't even know what the plan is. So pretty difficult position for her to have. In the cross-examination, we were talking about the review of some dates. My point of view is that she was out of the loop 50%, but she was also not reading her emails 50%. So when you're on vacation in such a middle of a crisis, I don't know if I would have just left emails without reading and understanding. I would have used that time to catch up with all those things that I consider important. But again, I don't know. Here are more documents that I just love to see in detail. Here on January 28, she received the first Hendon report. January 28, protest, not occupation. And then 24 hours after, on January 30th, on Sunday, it became an occupation because it was clear at the end of the night of that Sunday that they were not going to leave. By February 5th, the priority by Slowly was to remove these people from the city, and then Patricia felt that she was too involved, but perhaps in the tactical, and it was just very confusing because nobody had a clear understanding of the role. So everybody was fighting internally with everybody. Why are you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? And it was not clear. And One of the things that she said is that without the Emergency Act, Slowly could have never, or any person could have ever done without the resources and the Emergency Act to solve the situation. She saw the Emergency Act as necessary. Our next witness will be a little bit less inclined to say that it was necessary. Here we can see that there were some charges that were laid, and the injunction was a double-edged sword, because again, and we've heard this in previous testimonies, if you don't have the resources to operate with the injunction, then it cannot be implemented. So it becomes a matter of criticism. Why did you call for it if you cannot do anything? So it was difficult. I didn't know this. 50 individuals got their accounts frozen. So obviously you can't leave the city if you are out of money. So it was just very confusing, even in the deployment of that action. Interesting here, she was asked by the Freedom Counselor if anyone approached her to give false testimony. She said no, and she even smiled, saying, in my words, here's a spelling mistake. She was even smiling, saying, why would you ask me that? So interesting. Was he trying to clarify? Was he trying to probe? Does he know something that we don't know? I was very surprised by that question. Then you have here some questions from the city of Ottawa asking why didn't you block prior to the arrival, some issues on Kent, that there was never an emergency lane, nothing very interesting. They're talking about the numbers, etc. Here, the Ottawa Coalition talking about the fact that there were they fireworks, were they jerry tanks, everything. So you can see how clearly he actually said there were threats to hospitals in plural. No, there were not threats to hospitals. But anyway, I find this gentleman very inflammatory all the time. Of course, he's doing the job for the Ottawa Coalition between the businesses and the people. So he has to magnify everything. But the bottom line is that she is saying yes to all of those things that clearly were challenging for the city and for the group of officers on the ground. So that makes sense. And then she was saying that they were caught, and she's talking about the police officers, they were caught in a very weak moment. There's a lot of retirements, those rotations of people, resignations, etc., more cross-examinations, and I'm going to try to, oh my gosh, here, if you brought a minor, you would get a $5,000 fine and 5 years in prison. I can't even understand. Anyway, I sort of understand, but it's just such a controversial thing with kids these days, so I'm not going to talk about that. And then we can see here a little bit of a progression in terms of the dates and the number of vehicles, which is interesting. But again, just anecdotally, it's really not that important for the merits of this video. And then here you can see how many people were charged by day. So for the criminal offense of attacking an officer, you can see how in February 17 and 18, right after the act, and then before the day of the act, they started to arrest and give more tickets than any other moment throughout the time. In the end, the lead commissioner asked clarification. And I love his question actually today when he said, hold on a second, we moved from being white to being black from one day to another. Everything was okay, and then all of a sudden you have the Emergency Act. Was there any discussion to try to negotiate with them, to try to approach this in a different manner, perhaps moving them somewhere else so they could continue their protest? And the answer was no. So I really like that question. And as much as I didn't like his question yesterday, I really like his question today. Now, the second witness was very hard to listen in the beginning because he was very monotone, very flat emotionally. And it made me feel like he was just deploying without any challenging towards authority, which I sort of understand in that type of position. He also used the expression, I stay on my lane, but it was very rare that nobody was questioning why the vehicles were allowed in downtown. But again, it's not my place to question anything. He was in the call on Wednesday 27, questioned by the commissioner as usual to begin with. And then he said, I was in the call, but I didn't really felt inclined to question, but it was rare. Now, on February 2nd, there was another call, and then PLT was not used up to that point. And his position, once again, just like Patricia, is to be conciliatory and try to negotiate. And when they were asked for resources, because he is responsible for sorry, I forgot to say his name, Craig Abrams, superintendent for East Region. So it was a massive confusion that led to inaction because he was being asked, okay, send the resources, send the resources. How many resources do I send? Slowly would not say. Okay, so what is the plan? Are we going to put them on the streets? Are we going to put them on desks? Like how many people for how many days? And then slowly would not declare or outline what is the plan. So clearly he started to be a little bit resistant to send his people. He felt during the testimony very protective of his people, which I totally love. And he was reluctant to send people without a clear plan, which makes perfect sense to me. Now, this actually annoys me because I have the sense that the OPS planners and the PLT would have been able to de-escalate, have a conversation and develop an alternative plan of action, which even we're going to see in a minute, they started to get some success with the convoy. But I feel that this is how it was. There was tons of ideas, but there was no plans and a lot of internal betrayals. We're going to see the details in a minute in terms of what happened on Coventry Road on this, when did it happen? Where is Coventry? Here, February 6th. So it's actually here. So there was, he took a deep breath, which I found fascinating because he was very flat in the beginning and then he started to be more emotionally involved. And he started to be a little bit more passionate about it. In a moment when a question was asked, he said no. In that tone, after being very flat, was really interesting. He was really against slowly plan or lack of plan, should I say, and he was very defensive regarding the fact that his operatives that are very good negotiators, they were negotiating with people on Coventry Road to make sure that they were removing gasoline and they were minimizing the exposure for not only the city but even for the protesters themselves. And they successfully negotiated, and then they were betrayed by their own people by arresting some of the convoy people. So obviously that broke the trust and created a lot of chaos because now he had a lot of people calling him, listen, I don't understand what is my authority. I don't understand what is my chain of command. I don't understand what I'm doing. So clearly everyone just wanted to leave and he wanted to remove his resources, which obviously was not going to be positive in the long run. So this is when he said no and he changed his tone of voice and this is just what happened. I will not trust you again. So there was a lot of trust issues. And then here there's a little bit of numbers in terms of how many officers per weekdays and then in the weekends. And the lack of information. I mean, he said, listen, I can't support your plan. So slowly, obviously, became irate with him. But at the same time, I see his point. Why would you deploy resources, send people for how many days to which hotel, how many days, clothing, who's feeding you, what's going on? So clearly, he was opposed to that very blurry plan. Slowly said to him, don't speak to me about this. I understand the politics. And then just simply because he would say, what are you going to do with the trucks? And then slowly wanted to operate in the dark. Abrams didn't support it. You can see how in terms of tactics, Abrams was a lot more aware of not only the capacity, but the smart way of doing things. Slowly said in the call, if I need 100 people, I will ask for 200 people. So obviously, because Abrams is responsible for sending the people, he's in the call. That doesn't make any sense. I'm telling you in the call, I'm lying to you. Everybody was puzzled. Like, I am starting to understand why Slowly had to resign. He was in a very confrontational position with a lot of people. And then on top of that, he was really not having a clear plan of actions. It was very loose. Here, Slowly raised his voice. The head is in Ottawa. Bring me 400 people, saying to Abrams, or I'll take it to the minister. What is that? Like, it's just threats, not really cohesively bringing all the resources together to bring to a positive resolution. So here's some notes from phone calls, which I found interesting because it has even by minute what was happening on the call. I'm extremely organized and I was very impressed with this. So here you can see there's a lot of compassion. This is the first man that I hear saying, listen, I had my people out there in the cold. I remember it was minus 20, minus 23 when I went to Ottawa. So imagine in the middle of the night, it's going to be worse with the wind. And you have these people for 15 hours or 16 hours, whatever number of hours, because you obviously don't have enough people. And you're stopping people after the Emergency Act saying, why are you coming to Ottawa? What is your business? What is your hotel? So it's a very difficult situation for them, and they were completely demoralized. So obviously, imagine what happens next. He is on February 23rd about to brief his officers, and then he's watching TV, and the crime minister comes out and says, well, now we're revoking the act. Now he has 300 officers waiting for him to talk about what is the plan, and he was just being informed by the TV that now you don't have the act in place. It was just from top to bottom. What a mess. What a mess. He's being asked what could have done differently. He said to think about how can we lessen the impact of our city, how can we divert them to another area, and then can we just move the protesters on foot and not allow the trucks. So you can see how he's always about allowing the protests to evolve in a positive manner and bring it to a positive resolution, as opposed to slowly talking about extremely aggressive language internally and externally, and then the crime minister invoking the act. Patricia gets a 10 out of 10, came very out as very credible, offered her resignation to Slowly, and she's still there. And Slowly, as we know, is not there. So clearly, to me, it proves that she was right. She talked about lack of plans, etc. I love her approach to safely negotiate, and she said that every document she releases, remember, she's a strategic lady, so she releases with that approach. I love that. And how it was moved from white to black, the question from the lead commissioner, I really love her answer as well. The second witness, that is Craig Abrams, sorry, I don't remember his last name pronunciation, gets a 10 out of 10. The fact that he was so controlled in the beginning and then became very passionate, to me, tells that he's telling the truth. I'm not an expert in body language, but I really felt that he really wanted to help and he couldn't do it properly, and that was very frustrating for him. And also, he was feeling for his own people, sent his people without a clear plan, no line of command, no organization, massive confusion, led to inaction. And just like Patricia, strongly believes in the ability of his officers to negotiate and not attack. Thank you very much for listening. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye.